Hello, everybody, and welcome to a little talk that I've put together about peptides. We get a lot of questions about peptides, and I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about the science behind peptides, what they are, what they do, how they're useful in skincare. So, I'm Dr. Dave, I'm the Chief Scientific Officer here at FACTORFIVE, and let's just start talking about peptides. So, what are peptides? What kind of peptides do we use in FACTORFIVE products, and how do proteins and peptides work together? First, you need to understand a little bit about the central dogma of molecular biology, and this is really just a fancy way of telling you some elementary production issues about proteins. And so many of you may know that in our bodies, we take DNA. DNA is the code. DNA is transcribed into RNA. RNA then gets translated into protein. And all of these things have different constituent parts. So DNA is made out of nucleotides. RNA is also made out of nucleotides, although the nucleotides are slightly different. And proteins are actually made out of amino acids. There's 22 different types that go into forming proteins in our bodies. Now, amino acids you can think about as these little balls over here on the left. Those basically all come together into something that we call a peptide, and those peptides are basically put together in the form of proteins. So if you move left to right, you can see the balls assembling into a line, and then it's a little bit more complicated of a line as the protein. And so really, peptides are just small pieces of proteins that are 2 to 20 amino acids long. Proteins have a variety of shapes and structures. As you can see here in this figure, up on the top left, you can see that there's this primary structure. Then as you move to the secondary structure, it's a little bit more complicated. Maybe that thin squiggly line turns into an alpha helix or a beta sheet. Then you have these tertiary structures where those beta sheets and alpha helix get put together. And then you can also have these quaternary structures where proteins basically combine with other proteins to make complete protein. And so the key here is really that peptides have less well-defined shapes and structures than proteins themselves. They're basically little chunks of proteins, and they don't have these complicated structures. So for those of you who don't know, the way that cells talk to each other is basically by secreting proteins. So if you look at this image over here on the left, this is what we call paracrine signaling. Hopefully you can see those little brown cells are secreting out proteins, the little green proteins. And those green proteins, if we look on the right side here, they're going to bind to these receptors on the surface of other cells. So we call this paracrine signaling. Para means next to. So the cell is basically secreting a protein out of itself into this external milieu where normally this would be filled with extracellular matrix, especially in your skin. And those proteins will go over and touch a receptor on another cell and initiate a signaling cascade inside of them. In other words, one cell is sending a protein out of itself to talk to another cell. Now, there's another example of this. We call these exosomes. This is really hot in skincare right now. Exosomes are basically the same kind of concept where you can have proteins, but as they're secreted, they're not just free proteins, they're actually wrapped in the lipid bilayer of the cell itself. Now, exosomes don't just have proteins, there's a lot of research on exosomes. Exosomes can be DNA particles, they can be RNA particles, but they can also be protein and actually parts of the cells that are secreted. But it doesn't really matter. The key here is that cells can communicate to other cells with exosomes, especially if they're wrapping protein and sending that protein into another cell. Now, an important concept here is that cells really communicate with each other with these proteins, but these proteins are really species specific. So we've got a little image here of a plant stem cell, and it's sending off a signal, secreting. Now that signal is not going to bind to a human cell, okay? So every living organism modifies proteins a little bit differently. Some add certain sugars, fold proteins in a certain way. But one thing is definitely true. The best way to get a signal to a human cell is to use a human cell secreting those proteins. those proteins will go over and talk to the human cell. Now, what about peptides? Why do they exist? What do these peptides do? Now, as we mentioned before, peptides can make proteins when they're assembled together. So an example of this would be insulin. You have a bunch of peptides that come together and they make this molecule that we call insulin, which is a protein. They can function as hormones. They can signal to other cells. A really great example would be things that we're thinking of right now: Ozempic, Wegovy, Zepbound. All of these things are GLP-1 agonists. Those GLP-1s are only about 30 amino acids long, so these are not huge proteins. In fact, most of the time we refer to these as peptides. Some of these peptides can actually directly kill microbes. One of the examples would be defensin. And some are released as signaling molecules inside of your nervous system. So there are some peptides that are actually bind directly to your opioid receptors and basically alter your brain chemistry. But really, when it comes down to this, most of this is really nomenclature. So peptides are functionally just really small proteins that don't have the intricate folding structure of fully formed proteins. Now, what about peptides for skincare? Lots of peptides exist that are useful for skincare. These peptides can be used to make collagen. So collagen is actually comprised of 3 peptide chains that are assembled together. These peptides can signal to other cells, they can reduce inflammation, and they can block signaling pathways that cause wrinkling, like Botox. We'll talk a little bit more about some of these peptides. So what are some peptides that we use in our products? I'm going to go through these slides, kind of give you a breakdown of some of these cool peptides that we use. And I'm going to give you some information in these red boxes over here on the right. So if you look at the red box, I kind of want to direct your eyes to that right now. So the amino acid sequence is usually included in the name of these peptides that are used for skincare. Okay, so this one that we're talking about is called bis-tripeptide copper acetate solution. It's also listed as GHK-Cu. Okay, now basically this is GHK and it has copper added. Copper is the Cu. GHK is G stands for glycine, H stands for histidine, K stands for lysine. These are basically the 3 amino acids that are put together. So think about this. This is a peptide of just 3 amino acids attached to a copper, okay? This is originally isolated from human plasma. The stuff you get in your product isn't isolated from human plasma. It's made in a laboratory, but originally this was identified in human plasma. And it's been shown to firm skin because it stimulates collagen formation and encourages elasticity. It actually promotes wound healing and hair follicle repair, repairs damaged skin, and it has anti-wrinkle properties and anti-aging properties. We put this peptide into all our products except for the RDS1 Renew. Another peptide that we use in our products is ECGYF. You can look over here on the right. The amino acid sequence is listed. It's not used in any other skincare products that we know of. We've put this in our patent-pending RDS1 formulation. What we do know from literature is that it inhibits melanin production, it's an antioxidant, it improves skin texture, and it reduces age spots. So again, EF5, the concept here is it kind of starts with E, ends with F. It's 5 amino acids. Those are the amino acids. So just think about the fact that this peptide are these really small chunks of these 5 amino acids just attached, and it has all these incredible activities that it actually does. And I mentioned that we've seen this in the literature, but we've also done internal studies that show that EF5 has these effects as well in your skincare products. Now, there's another one that's a really important one called acetyl-octapeptide. This is called SNAP-8. It is 8 because it's 8 amino acids. This is a really cool peptide that we use. This is in our regenerative serum, it's in our night cream, and our anti-aging cream. It's a really good humectant, which means that it absorbs water, and it has anti-wrinkle and anti-aging properties. You don't need to read this bottom thing, but what I want you to know is that basically it targets the same pathway that causes wrinkles as Botox, okay? It functions in a different stage of the process, but the process is basically the same. And so I have over here on the right where Botox targets, and I have basically acetyloctopeptide, SNAP8, affects a similar part of this pathway where basically you have muscle relaxation and you have a reduction in wrinkles. And again, this is included in most of our products, especially the ones focused on improving the skin's texture, the elasticity, basically to give you the look of a more regenerative and youthful skin. Now, we also use another peptide called palmitoyl tripeptide 37. This has a thrombospondin domain that it activates this TGF-beta protein. And the reason I mention that is what that does is it boosts collagen, elastin, and hyaluronic acid synthesis by fibroblasts. And so this reduces wrinkles and fine lines. It's important for anti-aging, smooths and firm skin, it brightens the skin, and it moisturizes and repairs the skin's barrier function. In this we include in the regenerative serum, the night cream, and the anti-aging cream. There's another final one that we're going to talk about, which is called myristoyl pentapeptide. And this one is really cool because it activates the expression of keratin genes, and that causes thicker, longer hair. Basically, the way it does this biologically is it increases the duration of the hair growth phase. This is really important for anti-aging, for smoothing skin and improving texture of skin, stimulating cell regeneration. It reduces the pro-inflammatory cytokines and inflammation. It's antimicrobial and antifungal, and it's not a prostaglandin. So a lot of people are concerned when you're looking at things like we include this in the lash serum. It's important for growing hair. A lot of people have some concerns over whether it is a prostaglandin. It is not a prostaglandin. This is actually just a 5 amino acid sequence over here, pentapeptide, and that's attached to myristic acid. Just as a carrier to get it into the skin. So are these peptides made by mesenchymal stem cells? Mesenchymal stem cells are basically the cells that we use to produce stem cell proteins and put into all of our products. We have other videos you should watch if you're interested in learning a little bit more about mesenchymal stem cells. And of course, I mean, these peptides are very likely being made by the ADMSCs. So remember I showed you the paracrine signaling. We basically have the secretion of proteins. We have the secretion of exosomes. We know that ADMSCs make both of those things. And we also know that ADMSCs are also making peptides. So we're currently investigating all the different peptides that our cells are making under the conditions that we grow them in the laboratory with proteomics. And another thing that I want to mention, though, is that remember that our products contain ADMSC-derived proteins that are also beneficial for skincare. So on this slide, I'm showing you a brief summary of a lot of the proteins that we've already identified as being produced by ADMSCs. And we have this written out as ADMSCs express about 500 to 800 proteins. Over 200 are related to or involved in skin health, including all of these ones that I've highlighted here. Now, I've highlighted a bunch of these in different colors so you can kind of see they kind of group together. The red ones are extracellular matrix proteins. We have really important ones for regenerative medicine that are kind of highlighted in a yellow highlighter, such as SOD2, TIMP2, and GM-CSF. Those are also different proteins. The ones that are blue are really important in remodeling the extracellular matrix, so TIMP2 is one of those. It's unknown what the role of that is in regenerative medicine. It's basically this fountain of youth gene that is really important for inducing youthfulness in animals. It's been shown in multiple studies. The green ones are growth factors. There's a whole bunch of growth factors you can see there. In the orange, you can see these immunomodulatory proteins that are really important. And again, the ones that are highlighted are really important in youthfulness. And so we're constantly doing more studies to see what the protein signals are secreted by these cells. But the point of all of this is that our FACTORFIVE Skincare has these ADMSC-derived proteins. And it also has peptides that are there. So we know that there's over 600 proteins that are derived from those ADMSCs. There's multiple clinically proven peptides that we've included in these products. We perform our own rigorous scientific studies supporting the efficacy in skincare. And I think what's also important is that the rest of our creams and serums and products, we use excellent emollients, vitamins, and other ingredients. And I think it's important to note here that it's really the combination of all these different things, right? You don't just want a serum that's loaded with proteins. You want a serum that's loaded with proteins, that has the right mix of vitamins, that has the right mix of humectants, of extracellular matrix, supporting proteins, of peptides. All of those things working together is what really gives you an excellent skincare product. So hopefully that helps you think about peptides and proteins that are in the Factor 5 products a little bit more. And if you have any questions, of course, feel free to hit me up, David at FACTORFIVESkin.com, or just go on our website, look for more information. Thanks a lot.